Okay, so good afternoon. I'm Eric Schiff from the New York State Center of Excellence in Environmental and Energy Systems at Syracuse University. It's sort of a mouthful. I'll be moderating today's panel discussion about green technology, market needs, and affordable housing. We've lined up 3 expert panelists, whom you can see in the videos, with long experience working with affordable housing. Our emphasis today is not the whole subject, which is huge, but on market opportunities for smaller companies with innovative technologies and a vision that applies to affordable housing. I wanted to mention before I forget later that today's webinar is part of the EPIC Buildings project. That's a unique project at Syracuse University and Center State CEO, our local Chamber of Commerce. It's funded by the United States Department of Energy. And if you're curious, not only are we EPIC in our scope, but it stands for Energy Program for Innovation Clusters. It's a relatively new Department of Energy program you may not have heard of. There are about 10 EPIC programs around the country. We're unique because we have a specific focus on the built environment, which is why we call ourselves EPIC Buildings. Our goal is to support small businesses developing energy hardware innovations for buildings. We do have a regional emphasis, so we don't literally exclude companies that are not in our region, but the emphasis is local in basically New York State or the Northeast. We're just finishing the second year of the 3-year project. So this is how our webinar today and panel discussion is organized. We're going to start out by having each of our 3 panelists basically introduce themselves. I'll mention their names and where they are, and then let them take over. And a bit about their responsibilities. And then to make it a little more lively, at that point, I've asked each of the panelists to describe an aspirational technology. That's not one that you can buy today. They'd love to see succeed in the affordable housing market. All of the panelists have experience in that market and understand the needs much better than most of us do. After we finish the sort of introductory phase, I'm going to ask the panelists essentially for what their advice would be to smaller companies that are seeking impact in this market, the affordable housing market. We'll have a discussion of that. And at that point, it's a little more free form. So you might find panelists interrupting and even arguing with each other. That would be great. And then after we finish the sort of formal discussion, I am inviting everyone who's registered and with us today to submit questions. I can't guarantee we'll get to all questions. If you'll send your questions either directly to me, Eric Schiff, as a chat message in Zoom, then we'll try to pick it, or you can send it broadly to the whole audience. And Tammy Rosanio, who's on with me today, we'll try to pick a few questions for the panelists to answer. Oh, do mention a panelist if you have a specific interest in asking Wayne or Ian or Jordan to respond to your question. Okay, so let's get going. I'm going to first start out by getting my little script here in front of me. We're going to start with Wayne Miller. Wayne's been with the New York State Division of Housing and Community Renewal for more than a decade. Indeed, quite a bit more, I guess, but in any case, he can explain that. His technical title is a Training and Technical Assistant Representative. Anyway, Wayne, you can explain better. So why don't you explain a little bit more about the Division of Housing and Community Renewal, a bit about your responsibility and history, and then to stimulate further conversation, if there's a specific technology needed in affordable housing that you're a fan of, please let us know about that. And we'll do this sort of exercise for each of the 3 speakers and then go into a broader scope discussion. So, all right. So Wayne, why don't you tell us a little about yourself? And do unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. I've been working in weatherization for the Weatherization Assistance Program in some aspect for working on 30 years now. I've actually, you were right in saying more than a decade. I've been with the state working for the state for more than a decade, but I've been involved in weatherization at the county levels, on a couple different county levels as well, running weatherization programs and housing programs. So I've been around, and most of my experience has been more with retrofits to existing buildings. Pretty much all of my experience has been, and more so with small small multis and single family buildings. So, and with that said, there's so much technology out there now that I'd like to see more of. One we were talking about earlier is like easy access to like heat pumps, portable type heat pumps or window-based heat pumps. The other things I'd like to see is more energy storage for solar and especially for the housing stock that we're talking about, and more into, transparent solar panels, things like that, utilized more. So that's my thoughts.
Transparent solar panels would be to let regular light through, or what was the point?
For heating purposes, and also change it for not to affect it, hurt it in the summertime as well, not to generate too much heat, put it that way.
I see. Okay, great. All right, thanks very much, Wayne. Let's see, I think Jordan's next on my list. Jordan's been a program and project manager with New York City's Housing Authority for about 7 years, if I calculated right. Before that, he was an energy auditor with the Northern Manhattan Improvement Corporation, if I got that right. Okay. And then has some interesting earlier experience, both as a community organizer and as a field organizer on an unspecified political campaign. So that's pretty interesting background. Anyway, Jordan, could you expand a little bit on the City Housing Authority and your present work with them? And of course, share your technology dream for affordable housing.
Sure. Well, yes, I also just wanted to add that Northern Manhattan Improvement Corporation is a weatherization assistance provider. So I do have some weatherization experience as well, though not as much as Wayne. But yeah, here at New York City Housing Authority, I work in the sustainability department. We have like an energy programs division, as well as a more sustainability focused division. I specifically work on energy efficiency projects, decarbonization of NYCHA housing stock, primarily through electrification of our heating and hot water systems. We look at a lot of tech pilots in my department, piloting new technologies that can get us to our local law 97 goals, which are carbon reduction goals down here in the city of 80% by 2050. That's the ultimate carbon reduction goal here. Some projects that we're working on in my department, the Clean Heat for All project, which is a partnership with NYCHA and NYCHA to develop a through-the-wall window heat pump, as Wayne was saying we need. So we're already working on that one. We're also looking at similarly, we have a 120-volt cooking challenge coming out to give plug-in electric stove options. I worked on a Retrofit New York design for Retrofit New York pilot here at New York City Housing Authority to try and implement an energy sprung type insulated prefabricated insulated panel system on one of our buildings. We're also looking at solar plus battery storage projects, and we also are soon, and we've already started on, but soon we'll have completed one of the largest pneumatic waste collection systems outside of Roosevelt Island and Disney World. So we'll put us in that category soon. Wow. So we do a lot of really cool projects in the sustainability department here. I'm very proud of the work that we do. Really pushing the envelope on some of these big key sustainability issues. An unrealized green technology, I actually had like a list of 20, so I'm going to pick like one or two that I think we definitely need, that I see a need for in the immediate future. So we're working on through window heat pumps, cold climate heat pumps right now. Those don't have a fresh air ventilation component, and we do need to start really making sure that our buildings, I work primarily in, as Wayne's also said, in retrofitting existing buildings, and the ventilation systems in those can be pretty old and not really to the new standards that we have. So bringing in fresh air ventilation, I think, is a next really key component of a real comprehensive modernization of our buildings. So being able to utilize existing penetrations through walls wherever we can is something that NYCHA is really interested in. So coming up with sort of like either a through the wall or through the window ventilation ERV, I think is sorely needed. And also we're looking at electric DHW right now at a lot of our projects, and one of the issues we're having with what's available on the market with heat pump technology is just the need for this excess storage. Really, you're having to size like really large storage capacities with some of these heat pumps, kind of keep like thermal batteries in your basement, which is great, but it does drive up the cost we're finding, and just the constructability of having to store, 2,000 gallons of water in a basement somewhere. So the need for maybe an electric hot water system with a little bit less storage without sacrificing the efficiency. We're not looking at resistance heat still, but yeah, those are two items that I could see a need for in the very near future.
All right. Okay, thanks very much, Jordan.
And electricians. We need more electricians. That's not a technology.
Okay. That's not a technology. It's soft. It's a soft technology. I mean, electricians. Okay, yeah, that's actually I've heard that in Syracuse as well. Anyway, okay, thanks. So our third panelist is Ian Shapiro. He's likely best known in our community for his founding and many years of work at Tatum Engineering Company in Ithaca. Tatum has worked on a huge variety of engineering and analysis projects in all facets of the built environment. Of course, we have Ian here. He can tell you more if he wishes. What you may not know is that Ian was recently appointed a professor of practice in the College of Engineering and Computer Science here at Syracuse University. In addition to that, it's my pleasure and honor to announce that he will actually be taking over the Epic Buildings project next month. So we lured him in from Tatum and then gave him some work to do here, in addition, of course, to his teaching and other projects. So Epic Buildings is the sponsor for today's activities, and I've already sort of described it. Anyway, so it's your turn, Ian. How about telling us anything else you'd like to add about your career and your Epic plans for Syracuse University, and of course, your aspirational green technology?
Thank you, Eric, for hosting this and moderating this. And before I forget, so I don't forget, I would like to thank you for running this program so well and wish you well in retirement. You will be my role model in a few years' time. So as you mentioned, I used to work as an engineer at Tatum, and I've come back to Syracuse where I started my career at Carrier. Designing heat pumps to work on more heat pumps. I'm teaching in engineering, and then at the Syracuse Center of Excellence, I have responsibility for building science and community programs. So that's a liaison with the community. We're starting up with a research project we were awarded with the National Renewable Energy Lab in the area of heat pumps, and we'll be doing some evaluation work looking at losses, and then doing a demonstration project in Syracuse. And we're excited about that. I wanted to, we're also working on a new master's program in the area of building science and technology. So there'll be an announcement about this in coming months. We may have it up and running next fall. So if you know of students looking for an interdisciplinary master's, it's architecture and engineering, they can reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to them. And then for the Epic cluster, we are expecting to be renewed for that within weeks, and we will be opening that up to startups. So if you know of startups in the field, it's what today's event is really about. that might be interested to participate, we have wonderful support that happens as part of the program. I can also take inquiries about that. That's me, and now dream products. Deep energy retrofits, an affordable deep energy retrofit. We're all wrestling with it and struggling with it, finding ways to insulate buildings affordably. If we can do it on the outside so we don't disturb the residents, that would be the home run. And we're struggling with ways to do that affordably. I keep dreaming about, walking up to the side of a building and slapping insulation on in a day. And it's been such a challenge for a few years. Affordable deep energy retrofit. A small heat pump. I'm so excited about the Clean Heat for All pilot down at NYCHA. I had a chance to work on it some myself, but what an idea. They're going to plug a window heat pump into a wall receptacle, 110 volts. I would love to see us go even smaller with heat pumps. So down into the 1 to 2,000 BTU range. That because new buildings have much lower loads. So this would primarily be for new construction, but also for small bedrooms, small offices. Sometimes kitchens need some extra heat. A small heat pump. And for a small heat pump, we may well need smaller compressors. So, and especially with low impact refrigerants. Those are things that I think we need. Domestic hot water heat recovery would be another area that would be cool. And then that would, the Canadians have these drain water heat recovery devices. They're just copper, right? They're copper pipe wound around a copper drain pipe. That's it. I mean, it's going to last for 100 years. If we could find good ways to install that, maybe below sinks or something, it would take the load off of the new electrified water heaters. So those are some of my dreams, but there is so much need for new technology. And if we see the success that LED lighting had transformed our lighting and the success of solar PV, we never thought solar PV would be affordable. And here it is taking over the market with a fraction of the cost of what it was even 10 years ago. So we want you more products and really help us solve these big environmental challenges we have. That's it. Thank you. I want to hear the rest of Jordan's list. I don't care if you just rattle them off. The more, the better.
Did you want to rattle a few more off, Jordan, before we move to phase 2?
Would I end on
Ian has
electricians?
invited you.
Sure. I mean, we need, again, all of these are retrofit needs, but windows that, potentially could be retrofitted over old frames without impacting the U value. We have, a lot of the costs for our window replacements come from removing the frames and a lot of the hazmat challenges that come with that, with older buildings, particularly. Smart electrical panels to evenly distribute new loads from heat pumps and stoves and other large appliances. Like we have the, these buildings are, they have the electrical infrastructure of buildings of 70, 50 years ago. So upgrading that is very challenging, but being able to control how your load is distributed with a better granularity, I think is a big, would be a big win. We're also looking at a lot of battery integrated products that make themselves kind of smart to shave their own peak demand. So for instance, this 120 volt stove that we're looking for, there's some companies that we've identified that are attaching small batteries to their appliances that slow charge and then can discharge when the unit is actually in use, and then really eliminate some of the peak demands on the buildings that way, and add diversity among the whole build. Like, again, I'm looking at multifamily buildings here particularly, but adding diversity among the buildings. What else? Insulation, as Ian said, this is really, really important, and it's been a huge challenge for us too. Our retrofit New York pilot looked at exterior panels, and the pricing just isn't there yet. I don't know how that one will get solved, honestly, but that's a big need. That's all I got. That and the Uber of electricians. So if somebody can come up with Uber for electricians, we really need those.
That's definitely on the soft side of
Yeah.
energy hardware. All right. Okay, anyway, that was great. Thanks to all three of you. So we're going to move on to sort of a more open-ended second phase, and Jordan's actually just nicely introduced the disorganized second phase of the panel discussion. But I've asked the panelists to think about the following scenario, which specifically applies to smaller companies. So a startup company has a prototype of an interesting, and for our Department of Energy funders, energy-related hardware project for affordable housing. So they come to one of you three experts, Jordan, Wayne, and Ian, for guidance about what to do next. They've got a great prototype. You think it's interesting. You have no idea if they can ever market it. So they're going to need help validating their claims, which always need to be checked, and finding opportunities for demonstrations, pilot installations, and of course that hopefully will lead to further investment. And so I guess it's in startup language, these are all companies descending into the valley of death. They somehow got far enough to make a pilot, but now they need your advice and guidance in trying to get it to actually work, especially in affordable housing. So I'll start with Ian, who's better primed for this question, while Jordan and Wayne ponder it. So what are the affordable housing markets that you'd be aware of for our hypothetical startup company?
I've been working in affordable housing for about 30 years. And some things have struck me across affordable housing, whether it's the weatherization assistance program, Wayne's program, whether it's public housing authorities, whether it's Section 8 housing, whether it's rural housing, affordable housing. New York City, the housing finance agencies, the big housing finance agencies, it's HCR upstate, and in New York City, it's HPD and HDC, lots of acronyms. But there's a lot of affordable housing. And if you look at the statistics, a large fraction of our multifamily housing is affordable housing. And something struck me over the past 30 years, which is, it's an area of need, right? The people in these buildings can't afford high utility costs. But it's also an area in which New York State, for sure, recognizes and prioritizes this need. And so there are state agencies, whether it's HCR, whether it's NYCHA, and city agencies, HPD, large public housing authorities, NYCHA in New York City, Syracuse Housing Authority upstate. Every single, virtually every city for sure, and most towns in the state has a public housing authority. And the decision-making is centralized. In other words, they have the capacity to make a decision to lower carbon emissions, to and in fact, in New York City, they're under a mandate to do that. But they are able to do it in some ways more nimbly than the private sector. And I'll give you an example. In a co-op or a condo, you have as many owners as you have apartments. And getting a consensus among those owners is not easy. And in a public housing authority, you've got a sustainability person if it's a large one, or a modernization coordinator or a facility manager. You've got the executive director. They are often accessing, and I know it's hard, I know it's painful, but they're accessing public funds. Those funds can be HUD funds, they can be low-income tax credits, they can be pilot funding through NYCHA. We are currently running multiple major pilots. Many of these fully fund the work. I'm not saying it's easy to access, but in my experience, there is a lot of interest and a lot of support and a lot of funding for this work. I'll give you other examples. Upstate and rural areas, low income, multifamily, they're eligible for USDA financing. People don't recognize how involved the USDA is, not only in agriculture, but in energy work. They've got a Rural Energy Assistance Program, REAP. They've got mortgage refinancing. So I wanted to say that the centralized decision-making and the interest at state and federal and city levels in supporting affordable housing is and especially in New York State, is unusually strong. So I have another point to make, but I want to give Wayne and Jordan a chance to speak, and specifically to respond. Am I overstating how the case for doing this work in affordable housing?
Okay, Wayne, why don't can you pick up the next?
Yeah, I can comment on that. I agree with you, Ian. There's a lot of funding opportunities out there. It's just not easy to access, right? So they have to really reach out and look for that funding. So as a startup company, maybe it would be wise for them to have somebody on staff that's trained and know how to access and where to look for that type of funding, first of all. And then for a pilot project, once they have funding to do the pilot projects, I always had dreamed or thought that we could actually incorporate that once we meet our funding source requirements for whatever the product may be, depending on the product, of using that in weatherization in different situations, and using that as the pilot project. And this way they can gather data and prove all the, get all the information they need to prove that the effectiveness of whatever that product may be. Now, that wouldn't work for every product or a lot of startup stuff, but I think it would be, I think that would be a good start. I think, Ian, like you said, it's a lot of it's difficult to access, and getting people motivated to access that funding to do this kind of work is not always easy,
Wayne, are you still seeing, the annual DOE funding for weatherization assistance? Is that still flowing every year?
Oh, yes. Right now we're with all the other, bipartisan infrastructure money, that kind of stuff we have a lot of money right now. Weatherization has increased pretty well over the past few years.
And how does a startup company get their widget qualified or accepted? Does that go through DOE in Washington, or does it go through you, or does it go through some kind of a committee?
Yeah, it would be best to start with DOE. DOE, there's a lot of rules and requirements that the products need to meet, right? So if they meet that requirement, DOE could sign off them, and they can actually, we could actually do a variance for once they understand the product and approve it, we could do a variance so that we could use it within our program. We have they have a list of products that they say is allowable products that begin used within weatherization. But I guess that's a huge a huge process to change that list. So, but we can do it if they actually worked through DOE to get the right approvals, then came back to us, and then we could actually do a variance to say, okay, and be able to use that within New York State. It's New York State weatherization.
Great.
Yeah.
Jordan, would you like to add something?
Well, two things. A story is I recall when I first started weatherization back in 2011, the only LEDs that were allowed to be used in weatherization that were approved were like LED exit sign lights. We weren't allowed to put LEDs anywhere else. I don't that hadn't been approved yet, and I think Dan and I up in Northern Manhattan did one of like the first LED pilots up there where we did a whole building with LEDs, and the savings were unbelievable. And after that, they were like, yeah, LEDs everywhere. So
yeah, and the comment on that, actually, Ian was one of actually helped us get our using LEDs approved for at least for upstate anyway, when we were working directly with Tatum.
Yeah. So man, I feel old, but that wasn't that long ago, I think. And then also we recently did a project with AEA down here in the city at a development in the Bronx where we using weatherization funds through the ARPA program. We were able to electrify an entire building with the APACA units, through the wall APACA units, and electric heat pump DHW, and all that was weatherization funded and installed. So that was fantastic. In terms of opportunities, I just wanted to highlight a couple. We get pitched a lot of tech all the time to install this at NYCHA, and a lot of it is really interesting. But we don't have funds. We have a pretty small budget within weatherization in the sustainability department, and sometimes the tech that gets proposed has a pretty high upfront installation cost. So it's good to go after some of these programs that will, if you come to a housing authority or like an HPD or HCR with something funded already, it's a lot easier to implement than if you're just having conversations directly with the authority and assuming that they might have budget, to install like a battery storage system, for example. It's quite expensive. So there are programs like we've worked with NYCHA's Next Gen Building, Next Gen Building Elevation Challenges, I think it is, and I think they're on their like 7th cycle of this, but they provide some R&D funds. And I think I saw Bob on this call also, who runs that over at NYCHA. I don't know if he's still here, but that program is, hey Bob, it's great. That's one of our heat pump proposers that we're doing the through the wall window heat pumps with, actually came through that program through the Next Gen HVAC Challenge, and they get some funding to do R&D and test out the units, and then we coordinate with them some space for the testing. So that's a great program. And then also we're working with the New York City Economic Development Corporation, EDC, on a prop tech pilot program. So you can apply to that, and we're working with one of their consultants to identify all these needs that NYCHA has, and then it kind of funnels all of these prop tech solutions to one place where we can kind of identify ones that meet specific needs of not just NYCHA, but also I think DCAS and EDC are part of these. These are city agencies, and then those are not funded, but there's some like program management assistance that is included with selected pilots there. So we're testing some like heating controls vendors right now, some construction management software. So that's another good avenue to be aware of. Yeah, and then also, like, as much as Ian says that we're ruling by fiat here, we do get a lot of input from our residents as well. So we ask them for, we're working with them on the Clean Heat for All challenge, and making sure that anything that we're installing in their apartments meets their needs and they're comfortable with and they can use, and we get them training and everything like that. But yeah, it does help to have a centralized, a central office that's managing all these developments, because they can make decisions a lot quicker, I think.
And I want to point out other pilots. There's right now an electrification pilot going on at HPD. NYCHA had an electrification pilot. We've got the NYCHA Next Gen program, which is also demonstrations, as Jordan mentioned. I want to mention the low income tax credit, LITC, is administered by the state and by the city through housing finance agencies. I mentioned them earlier. They're HCR upstate, HPD and HDC in New York City, and HCR is also active in New York City. So these agencies have the authority to grant projects with a substantial tax credit. And what those projects are developers who are refinancing their low-income housing and modernizing it. And so this might happen for a specific building once every 20 or 30 years. And that is a fabulous opportunity to insert new technologies, because the whole building is undergoing renovation and is accessing very, very substantial tax credits. And so the other point I wanted to make earlier is that when I started in this field, I was told, you'll never find anyone to buy anything that has a payback longer than 5 years or 10 years or 2 years or whatever. So everything was supposedly sold on a payback basis. And since then, I've found that this just is not the case. And it's often just a simple first answer for people to kind of just get you off their back. But it's not the case. In fact, decisions are made all the time for installing things that have 10 years payback and 20 years payback and 50-year payback. And as fuel costs have gone down, like natural gas prices have gone down, people are often installing things with a 30 or 40-year payback. And so I want to urge startups to not let that dissuade you, because in fact, people make decisions to do longer payback things all the time. And they're making their decisions based on other reasons. They're making their decisions based on, they might have a commitment to sustainability. They might have a public relations interest to try something new. And I have found that if one is persistent, and if you sell both the energy cost savings, but also sell the other features of your products, people are often very interested in comfort, very interested in health and safety, very interested in robustness and reliability and user friendliness. And they're often interested in the latest technology, and they're often interested in a public relations statement. So don't take that, oh, your product has a 4-year payback, it's too long for us. I just never take that as a given.
I'll just mention, I heard such arguments many times when I was working on window retrofits for RPE, 3-4 year paybacks. And it basically came from energy service companies would give you that line, which was certainly discouraging to some startup companies. Anyway, back to the panelists. So we're sort of drawing to a close. So I just wanted to offer you one last chance to offer any success stories you like, personal friends or not, as a vignette of companies that have actually succeeded We saw one, I guess, already, which is on its way to success with the energy-mounted heat pump. But how about a couple more examples from our speakers? Wayne, do you happen to have one? When you unmute.
I should just leave that off, but I can't really think off the top of my head of a real success story, to be honest with you. I like hearing that Jordan worked with ARPA to do many, totally electrify a building, which is one of our goals. The advantage they had with ARPA program is because we weren't required to meet any savings to investment requirements with ARPA funds, which was very nice. Every now and then we get lucky and be able to do that. And normally in weatherization work, you have to meet, they have to be cost effective to be able to do certain measures, which kind of would lead me back to the pilot stuff again. If we get pilots that funding that would offset costs for products that we could actually put into our program, would be nice.
Any specific examples, Ian? Jordan has one already, so I will.
Well, I don't want to steal Jordan's thunder. He's got a show and tell that is just wonderful. I'll just keep pointing to LED lighting. There's 15 years ago, I wasn't allowing LED lighting. The claims were so outrageous. The products were so lousy. They weren't meeting any sort of standards. I wouldn't even look at it. And I was wrong. They developed standards. The products today are affordable. They perform well when it's cold outside. They perform well in garages and outdoors. They come on instantaneously. They can dim. They don't have mercury, and they last for 50,000 hours. It's a success story beyond our wildest dreams. So I would point to LED lighting, which is really taken over the industry. And then, split system, variable speed heat pumps, cold climate heat pumps. I think there are big ticket success stories right under our noses.
Okay, so we're sort of drawing to a close. I can't resist mentioning that the very first example of visible light LEDs that turned into the first product was demonstrated in Syracuse, New York, about 2 miles from where we're sitting, by Nick Koloniak, and he's passed away recently. A man named Bavakwa, who lives up in Fulton and is in his 90s. And that was the birth of the industry you're just referring to 50 years ago. So anyway, I couldn't resist mentioning that, since not too many people know that the business started here with the gallium arsenide phosphide LED. I am a semiconductor physicist, so please forgive me for insisting on telling you that. Let's see, I just like to take 1 or 2 questions. So Rachel Rosen, I think, was asking the question, what is the process for getting a variance from weatherization? Which sounds like a good startup question. Can I get Wayne or Jordan to pick that up? Wayne, maybe?
Hi, Rachel. I think I've met Rachel a few times. It's
quite likely.
The variance, first of all, whatever the product is would have to be approved through DOE or meet all of DOE requirements and specifications. Once we have that, then we would have to apply for a variance to DOE through our office. But because we get offers all the time for different products that we would like to try this in weatherization or use this in weatherization. Sometimes, and there's no way for me in some cases to tell if it's meeting DOE requirements. So what I've started recently is some of the stuff I would just ask them to go to DOE, research DOE, and see what the material requirements are, the product requirements are, and go start there, and then we can work through that way. Great. Hopefully that answers your question.
Well, I hope so. Let me pick up another question. Christoph Schmidt, it's not exactly clear what the question is, but let me just read what is in the chat box. So are there wetness, moisture, and mold related issues that have to be solved thoroughly and in depth before other renovations, installations, or retrofits? And he mentions that the return on investment of that kind of repair and so on is good. But now see if one of you can pick that up.
You know, I would argue that mold and moisture and water is our biggest challenge by far in building science, by far. And you know, anytime you have a relative humidity above 70%, you're going to make mold. Mold makes people sick and makes buildings worthless. And the ways that water get into a building or leak from pipes are just infinite. And it's one of the challenges with deep energy retrofits is making them, is making them watertight. I mean, the cost of the exterior cladding, very little of it is in the insulation. It's in the moisture water resistance. So I think that water management, moisture management are like the biggest issue in making sustainable buildings. And Jordan,
Yeah.
I was going to say that's one of our big areas of concern at NYCHA is dealing with mold, because just our existing ventilation systems are inadequate. If we have any ventilation, it's usually mechanical ventilation for the bathrooms, and sometimes kitchens. But the buildings are in some ways tighter than when they were first built, just because the double pane windows that are in there now are better than the original single pane windows that were there. And they used to rely on just infiltration for a lot of the ventilation needs in New York City, at least in back when these were built. And yeah, moisture is one of our biggest challenges here, and that's why I think an elegant solution for bringing fresh air ventilation to some of these rooms that were not designed with it is one of the top priorities that we would have.
You know, one thing I've dreamed of is a small heat recovery heat pump ventilator, because that would provide heat, the trim heat that you need. You've got a heat source, which is the air that's leaving the building, is a fabulous heat source. And again, something small, because a typical room only needs 10 or 20 CFM. So miniaturization, I think, is a big area of need.
That would also help our issue with, ventilation problems. We're required to follow the ASHRAE 62 2016 version in ventilation in all buildings. And as you can imagine, with existing buildings, it's not that easy. We got creative, and now down in the city, we use a lot of, they developed what they're calling a window transom fan, where they, put a transom in a window and mount an exhaust fan in that transom, and, set it up to run it, on timers or continuous, whatever it needs for that particular unit. But it's not an easy problem to solve with existing buildings.
I agree. I think ventilation is very hard. And I mean, I'd like to see makeup air with heat pumps, because central makeup air today, we are very limited for the electrified trim heat. We're still relying on gas and oil, and the available heat pump makeup air units are very small.
Yeah, that would definitely help us solve a couple issues at one time. Right?
Okay, so it's another dream technology, I gather. Let's see, one last question from David Goldstein, which I think would be picked up by Jordan. How will an organization like NYCHA adjust to maintenance requirements of new technologies? It's definitely a bit weedy. Going from centralized steam heating to small decentralized window heat pumps, for example. I'll just let Jordan pick it up. I think what he's trying to say is pretty clear.
Yeah, so that, and hi, David. Good to see you again. David helped us install one of our first heat pumps at a development in the Bronx, and that was a VRF split system. So yeah, we're working with our operations department to kind of take over these units once they, once the pilot proves successful. The great thing about them is that they're very easy to remove and reinstall. So the plan, at least for the miniaturization of a lot of these products, is you can pop them out and put a fresh one in, and then work on the failed one without causing too much disruption to the resident in terms of service. But there is going to have to be a retraining of our HPTs who currently work on our steam systems now to deal with HVAC techs. And so we're working with the manufacturers right now to get them that training. A lot of the components, when we were doing design, were deliberately put in very accessible spaces within the unit. So we were thinking about how technicians would work on these. And then there's also been some talk about service agreements. This is another area that I think might be growing with manufacturers, kind of like post-sales agreements. So once they've sold you the unit, now they can have like a service agreement to maintain those. So we're talking with them about if it's something that cannot be fixed right on site easily, sending it back to the manufacturer, then they would do the fix, send it back, or send us a fresh. They would pick it up and drop off a fresh one, take it back, work on it, and kind of keep that chain going. So that's an opportunity for manufacturers to continue to get revenue, and also for the housing authority to maybe move some maintenance costs in a creative way. But yeah, it's just going to be a shift of resources. I don't think it's going to be addition necessarily. We already have 10,000 steam traps at any given development that get maintained or not.
Okay, so we're drawing to a close on time, so I want to go ahead and make sure I've thanked all the participants, including the listeners, and of course our panelists, Wayne, Jordan, and Ian. Please do write to us with further questions, or look at the Epic Buildings website. And so I'm going to sort of call the meeting to a close at this point, and thank all of you for coming.